Good morning, WhizGirls Academy Super Secret Agent trainees. Welcome to today's session. Today we have Master Trainer Sofia Russi. She is a veteran from the U.S. Air Force, so thank you for your service. And she's going to share her journey with us. Thank you so much for joining us, Sofia.
Thank you for having me today.
So tell us about your childhood.
So I grew up in LA County. I started kindergarten in 1989, and my dad was in the California Highway Patrol, and my mom was a teacher at a community college in Torrance. And so I grew up with living in Southern California and having a cop and a teacher as parents. So I'm the only girl of three kids. I have two brothers. One's older and one's younger than me, and we're each about 2 years apart. So we grew up kind of doing the same hobbies with each other, but we grew up with very strict parents who made sure that we kept our grades up, studied hard, and always followed the law. So, we always had to follow all the rules, and we would get in a lot of trouble whenever we broke one of those rules.
Thank you for sharing that. I can imagine childhood, we all have our journeys, right? Tell us a little bit about your hobbies and passions as a child, and if you had a dream job back then.
So when I was growing up, because I grew up near the beach, we spent a lot of time playing outside. My parents were big supporters of being outside, getting sun, playing on bikes, running around. But because of the professions that my parents were in, a lot of the games that we play were kind of role-playing games where we'd like to run around and play cops and robbers or play detective and things like that. So we also got really into making home movies. We didn't have camera phones like we do nowadays. So we had these really old systems that were relatively cheap for kids. Not that cheap, but something our parents could actually afford to get us for our birthday. And you would plug in a video camera into your VCR and you would press record on your VCR, and you would have this long cable that was about 20 feet long, and we would send it through the windows so that way we could film us outside trying to make home movies and things like that on these cassette tapes that is pretty poor quality. So nothing like what we have today with smartphones. The other things I loved to do growing up was basically building stuff. So if I had an opportunity to play with Legos or Connects or like any of the toys that are now considered STEM toys, they didn't call them STEM toys back in the 90s. They were just toys that were primarily for boys. But because I had brothers that were a little bit older, or one a little bit older and one a little bit younger, I got to play with their toys. And so that gave me the opportunity to learn how to build and just use my imagination. And the other thing we love to do is play video games. So we got our first Nintendo like in 1990 or 1988. And then I think I was in first grade, I got a Game Boy. And that was awesome because I didn't have to share it with my brothers. And so I got really hooked on the game Tetris, which is kind of funny because it's not that complex of a game, but if you've ever played it, there are modern versions of it now, but it is very, very addicting, very fun, and it really stimulates your brain because it basically is a puzzle that you're doing under time. So that was a lot of fun being able to play different games. And the 90s was really a time of computer enhancement. Like we look at what we have today, and I can't even remember what it was like to not have a smartphone in my pocket. But I do remember having to share a computer, going over to the different friends' house whose parents had better computers. And you'd have to ask permission to play a game. And they would turn on the computer for you because you weren't allowed to actually turn it on yourself. And it was very structured in terms of being able to get access to it. But then we had these learning games that were a lot of fun. Like there was this one game I used to play that was just this cheesy math game with classical music played with 80s instruments, so synthesizer type instruments in the background while you're solving math problems with a clock, or like where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? And there was another game that we played called Brain Quest, which if you're familiar with the show, Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? It's kind of like that. I know that show ended several years ago as well, but the Brain Quest game was you can actually hook it up onto a computer with two people playing it. So we play against each other. And it was having the influence of a teacher as a parent. A lot of the stuff that I did was very educational, even though it was still fun at the same time.
Okay, so you brought up a couple of things I want to backtrack on. Number one is STEM. So when did you
Okay.
actually hear about that word STEM? And was it back when you were like a child, or was it like recently?
I actually can't remember when I learned that word. It just seems like it's so part of my common vocabulary today. But I want to say as a child, I never even heard that term before. Maybe it was in college where I heard it first, or maybe even been after that. So we didn't grow up thinking, oh, you could get like, they didn't talk about in school, oh, you can get a job in a STEM profession and learn how to be a scientist or a researcher or an engineer or developer or all these really cool jobs. Like nobody ever talked about those. And so I think it's cool nowadays that we have these programs that teach you about these opportunities, because in reality, anybody could get involved in STEM. You don't even have to have a tech background to do it. You could be an administrator of STEM or a teacher, or just, if you like getting into finance, you could become a finance person that supports STEM. So there's all these careers working for the different research centers, or NASA or SpaceX or Blue Origin, like all these different companies that you could work at that support STEM activities and the future exploration of human beings without actually even doing that technical background. So there really is a lot of variety there. And I don't know how I ended up in a STEM career field. I feel like everything just so happened to be, I felt lucky. I loved math, and it led me down to the track that I ended up on, and it led me into a STEM career field.
It's really interesting that you bring that up. A couple of things. It's wild, actually, because we've had finance people on here actually this week, and a few weeks ago we've had VCs, we've had angel investors, we've had someone from Blue Origin, we've had NASA people, we've had astronauts, we've had all kinds of things. So it's interesting to hear about the STEM and how you have found your path in the STEM world. And I'd love to hear if you had any mentors along the way.
So I actually have had a lot of really great mentors. My very first mentor I met in high school, and I know him to this day. He was a teacher at my high school, but he was also a retired Marine. And so he started a Junior ROTC program at our school. And I joined the program mostly because my older brother did it. And he liked it because they went on camping trips. They got to learn how to do all kind of military stuff, go through obstacle courses and learn how to use weapons and things like that. And I joined it mostly because it was, my dad said, oh, I want to take you to school at the same time as your brother. So I could either sit there and watch him do it, or I could do it with him. And so that was actually how I got into it. And my mentor was the instructor for that. And he actually, when I remember, I didn't actually know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I think you asked me a minute ago, what was my dream job? And I didn't actually answer that question yet, but I loved architecture and I loved space. And so I said, I wanted to be a space architect. And so when it came time in high school to fill out applications for college, my mentor asked me, he says, oh, where are you applying? And I said, oh, I'm not applying anywhere. My mom teaches at this community college, so I'm just going to go to this community college. And he's like, oh, well, he says, you should still apply. He's like, going to a community college, there's nothing wrong with that, but maybe you could get a scholarship to go to a four-year university. And I said, but I want to be a space architect and I don't know how to do that. And he kind of laughed at me. And, but then he said, well, that sounds like an engineering job. And I was probably a junior in high school. I said, what's engineering? I had no idea what that term even meant. And so I started doing some research on it, and I learned what it was. And I looked at the classes, and it was almost all math classes. And I loved math. So I said, okay, I'm going to be an aerospace engineer. And that was actually how I picked my major.
That's so awesome. Okay, so for our super secret agent trainees that might not know what ROTC is or stands for, can you share that with us?
Oh, of course. So that is there's the Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps. It's the Junior ROTC, and they also have them in college, and that's the Reserve Officer Training Corps. And it's taught by military members that teach you about the different service that you basically what's sponsoring it. So when I was in high school, it was the Marine Corps because our instructor was from the Marine Corps. And then he was also the one that taught me that I could apply for scholarships. So I applied for an Air Force scholarship, and I got an Air Force ROTC scholarship. And what that did was, while I was in college, they paid for my education, and I attended ROTC classes, which taught me Air Force history. You learn about leadership. So I would say 3 of the 4 years of the curriculum, you're learning about leadership and how to basically learn how to follow others, learn how to lead others that you're over. So like your boss, but then also how to lead your peers. Because what you find out once you get into the real world, when it really comes down to it, you're actually working with people in your same peer group. And you have to figure out, think about all your friends. How do you tell your friends to do something that you want to get accomplished? And, tends to be a lot more arguments and confrontation if you have differences of opinion. And so you learn in this program, I did it in high school as well as college, you're learning how to lead your friends basically and work together and learn you're also learning how to follow. So that way, when it's somebody else's turn to be responsible and take charge, you learn how to follow their guidance. And it really teaches you how to work well with others. And that prepared me for entering into the Air Force, where I was going to be working with people from my age all the way up to my grandparents' age. And so it really taught me those different skills that I need to learn to work with others, learn to lead others, learn to follow others. These are all techniques that people just assume you're going to figure it out. But if you have someone guiding you, it makes it a little bit easier.
Wow. Very cool. Okay. So tell us about the Air Force experience and how long you were there, and like if you did STEM things there as well.
All right. So my first job in the Air Force, I got to go to Florida and work at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. And the program I worked on was called the Atlas V. And in that program, we were responsible for ensuring the rockets were built properly and they were launching satellites. So some of the satellites that they were launching were military satellites for communication, satellites for communication that run our cell phones nowadays. This is like, I joined the Air Force in 2007. So like I said, we didn't all have smartphones in our pocket. But a lot of the technology that our phones run off of come from these satellites that we were launching back 2007. I did that from 2007 to 2010. And hold on a second, I can share a couple photos real quick.
Very cool. Yeah, we would love to see them. And then also tell us when you went to SDSU as well.
Sure. So what, can you see any of my photos yet?
We can, yeah.
Okay, so let me pull up. So this is a photo, pull it up big. This is a photo of me when I was in Florida. This is the Atlas V rocket. So it's not a tiny rocket. On this rocket was actually, this is a military communication satellite. So this is a satellite that they launched so that the military troops can communicate with each other when they're in war. And I'll pull up a couple other pictures. So this is me up closer. This was one of my favorite missions. This was called the L Cross. And oh my gosh, don't ask me to remember what L Cross stood for. It's an acronym, but it's a NASA mission. And there were actually 2 satellites on this one. So there was the LRO, which was the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, and L Cross. And this one fascinated me so much because this one was the one that NASA actually launched this satellite. So they launched, hold on, let me switch back so you can see me.
Yeah, we can see like a bunch of photos, but we can't see one in particular. So
okay.
Why that's...
So let me figure out how to show you more. Oh, sorry about that. I didn't know.
That's okay.
I don't know how maybe you can see that. Okay, I see what you're seeing now. I know what to do now. I'm sorry. Okay, so these are kind of mixed up, but let me get to, so here's the photo I was talking about. This is the Atlas V rocket. So that one had the military communication satellite on it. And then, do you see this one with the white rocket? It says Atlas on it? Okay, so this is the rocket that I was just talking about. And so it's called L Cross, was one of the satellites, and there's the other one, Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. And that one, so the LRO satellite is still circling the moon, and it basically is doing what Google Maps does. So it's taking pictures of the moon and it's sending all that information back to NASA. But the L Cross portion of it, it stayed attached to this portion of the rocket, and NASA crashed this portion of the rocket into the moon, and that satellite separated right before it crashed, so it could follow the satellite into the crash site and take photos. And they use this to determine if they could find water or other types of natural resources on the moon. So
Wow.
that was a pretty fascinating, here, let me switch back, fascinating job. While I was there, I got to help launch 9 different satellites. I was in that job for 3 years. So the operations tempo is actually pretty fast. And surprisingly, they actually do it even faster nowadays. SpaceX came along and kind of encouraged everybody to work a little faster. So they're launching rockets on a regular basis out there now. So I did that for my first 3 years in the Air Force. Then I went on to work on Air Force missile systems that have similar technology as rockets, but they don't launch satellites. They're more of a deterrent to kind of make sure that we stay safe here in America if anybody ever tried to attack us. So that was my more military type job that I did. All of this was in the Air Force. And then I went into training where I was helping work. I live in Las Vegas now, and we were working the exercises at the Air Force Base here to help train the fighter pilots before they go off to war. So that's where I ended my Air Force career. And I did that for 7 years.
Okay, so let's backtrack for a second. So what point did you go to SDSU, and that's San Diego State University?
So I went to San Diego State University right out of high school. So that was in 2002. Sorry, okay. I interrupted you before you could finish your question.
And you majored in aerospace engineering?
That's correct.
Okay, so tell us about that.
So as an aerospace engineering student, so my classes were focused on aerospace education, learning to be an engineer. And then within that major, we had extracurricular activities. So I am going to try this one more time, make sure I don't mess it up, but I will try the screen share again. So if I go back to this photo, can you see a photo with a tiny rocket in the background?
Yeah, and a lot of people.
Okay. Yeah, so it's really hard to see me, but I am actually like three people over from the center of the photo, super tiny, but these were all college students. We had 2, I say adult mentors. We were technically adults, but we were college students. But we had 2 mentors that taught us how to build these rockets, and they worked for a company called Flowmetrics, which is what you see there on that actual rocket. And so this was the very first rocket we made, and unfortunately, it exploded. So the crazy part about that is that I think you learn more from your mistakes than your successes. And so we continue to build more rockets, and unfortunately we were never successful, but we constantly learn more and more. And now 20 years later, the SDSU rocket project is one of the biggest college rocket projects in the country. So that was pretty cool to be a part of that. And all of that was extracurricular. There was nobody telling us you have to do this. It was basically our hobby. We got to do it for fun. And going back to what I mentioned earlier about learning to lead and follow your peers, we were all students. Sometimes different people had different roles where they had to be responsible for something and you had to follow them, or sometimes you had to be responsible and other people followed you. So it was learning more about those leadership traits and learning to work in a team environment.
Wow. Did you ever have those like play rockets that you made and you could do as a hobby as a child, and then you did them in college as well? Or was it just kind of you started in college?
I don't remember. Like, I know what you're talking about, those toys. And I don't remember if I actually had them as a kid. I know in college we used to buy them because we thought they were fun. But as a kid growing up, it was a lot harder to get stuff, I think. Nowadays, like, you have Amazon, so you can just buy stuff. You know, as a kid, like, you do chores or you get birthday money, but to spend it, your options were actually really limited because you had to go physically spend it in a store. And so it was like, okay, what store was closest? And we lived about a mile from the mall. So we would walk to the mall, and there was no hobby store in the mall that I lived near. So we didn't really get to buy stuff like that. But I know the rocket toys you're talking about. In college, we did buy those and set those off in some abandoned fields and things like that. Those those are definitely very entertaining, but you got to make sure you do them in an open environment because you don't want to accidentally set something on fire.
Yeah, that's wild. And in terms of the rockets that you had, for how long were they basically not working and the failure? I mean, did you ever think about, okay, this isn't working, we give up, like we're frustrated, it's not happening, or was it like you were just going to push through?
It was pretty frustrating. And those rockets, like when I said they blew up, they were gone. You had to start all over again. And so it would take us half a year to build another one, or just take us months to try and get somebody to help pay for it, find somebody who could sponsor us and buy the parts. And later on, what we actually learned was the reason our rockets were exploding was because we were using old rocket motors that came off of the original Saturn V rocket that came out of a museum warehouse.
Wow.
And there's these itty bitty little rockets. I say itty bitty. They're like maybe 2 feet tall, but they go on the side of the Atlas V rocket, or not Atlas V, excuse me, Saturn V rocket. They're so tiny looking, you don't even realize they're there. But what they do is they were the thing that, as the rocket's going up, it kind of kept the positioning of the rocket, and they would let out little bursts of energy, so that way the rocket would just kind of stay on course while it was launching. And so we just put one of those on our rocket. But the problem with it was that, as I told you, it was in a museum, like in a box, and they had a whole bunch of them that never got used, and we had no way to properly clean them. Wow. One of the rockets, after I think it was after it didn't work, somebody said, hey, my dad works in this facility and he can cut that in half for us and see what happened on the inside. So when they cut it open, we could actually see where it had failed from. Because this one, it more like it went launched and then it went perpendicular or parallel to the earth, and then it just like crashed into the earth. And so we cut that one open, and you could see where it exploded, and it basically exploded out the side of it because there was so much rust and corrosion inside the rocket. It couldn't get the propulsions, the fuels couldn't get through, and so it shot out the side of it. And so that was when we realized, oh, it's probably not a good idea to be using these 50-year-old rockets without being able to properly clean them and inspect them, make sure that they're actually good.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's when you're starting out and being scrappy and problem solving and trying to figure stuff out, just like Elon Musk. I mean, I think for 18 years they had those rockets blow up in their faces at SpaceX. So it takes a lot of grit and perseverance to keep going. So you did, and then you went to the Air Force. I think there was like the Air Force Institute of Tech, right?
Right. So that was what I did for my master's degree. So the Air Force does have a school that is accredited in engineering. And I did it through distance learning, which nowadays that just sounds so normal. Oh yeah, everybody goes through distance learning. But I started that course in 2009, and that was the first distance learning course they had ever done. So I got to be one of the guinea pigs to help them learn how they should run their master's degree program. But basically what I did was I worked full time in the Air Force during the day. And then when I came home at night, I would log in and watch lectures and study and do all my homework till about midnight, go to bed and get back up at 7 o'clock in the morning and go back to work. So it was pretty tiring, but it was a good opportunity to get an accredited engineering degree at a more affordable rate. And so that was why I chose that method. And the courses that I was taking were more focused on what I was actually doing in my day-to-day job. And so like a lot of the teachers that I had been in jobs that I was in previously. So we were able to relate our course material to our day-to-day jobs. And that really helped me do my job better, as well as understand the material I was learning in school.
And how long was that program?
That took me, I want to say a little over 3 years, because I did take a quarter off when I got married. I didn't want to be in school. I got married and moved across the country all in a 2-month period. So I decided to take that quarter off. So it extended it a little bit, but it was 2009 was when I started. I think it was in the fall. And then I graduated in March of 2013.
Okay. And that program exists now if our super secret agents are interested in the future?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this program does still exist. It is
virtual?
only master's degree, but it's for all military and government employees are eligible to do it. So if you get a job, if you go into the military, or if you go into a government related job, you're eligible to apply to their school.
And it's still a virtual program?
They have both.
Oh, okay.
So they have virtual program, and now they have more majors that are virtual. The one I did was the first one, so it was the only one. But you can actually go in residence. The school is located in Ohio.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, great. That's good to know. And then after that, you went to Denmark Tech. Is that right?
So there was actually a job in between there. I went to a company called Bigelow Aerospace, and that was here in Las Vegas. And that's actually the picture I have up right behind me. What that program was, that was a program supporting NASA. So we were a company that was contracted by NASA to prove what's the word? It's basically they had come up with this technology where they wanted to be able to launch space stations cheaper, because the thing about launching into space, everything is based on weight. Rockets can only lift so much. So this technology that was developed, it was originally developed by NASA. The initial prototypes were leased out to the company Bigelow, and we got to use their research that they've been doing for the last 20 since like early 90s or so. We used all of their information, all their technology, and designed what they called the Bigelow Expendable Activity Module. And the size of this thing is maybe like the size of like a Fiat. So think of like a tiny little car, right? And you put it on a rocket. You could put it on the rocket that I showed you earlier that I was standing in front of, or you could put it on SpaceX rocket, which is actually what we did. So you put it on a SpaceX rocket, and it's this tiny little payload it's squished down, and the materials it's made out of are basically spacesuit. So what the astronauts used to wear. And once it gets to space, you can fill it with air. And then when you fill it with air, it expands from this tiny little, like the size of a Fiat, to a small school bus. And so what that does is it allows you to use smaller launch vehicles to send stuff up to space. So the one that I got to help build went to the International Space Station, and it was supposed to be there for 2 years, and then they were going to get rid of it. But they like it so much, they still have it. It launched in 2016, and it's still up there today, so 2023. And they use it to gather research to find out how safe is it to have these space stations made out of this material that's just like a spacesuit. A lot of the previous tests were this astronauts could go out for a certain amount of time, but then they needed to get back into the space station because of radiation. So this technology is allowing them to actually see, okay, this thing's exposed to the sun radiation 24/7. And so they have all kinds of sensors inside of it. And every once in a while they go in and they gather the data and check on it. And so this technology is going to help expand space exploration, because eventually it'll be used to make really huge space stations in a very short period of time. Or there's even ways that at Bigelow, we were designing ways that you could launch into like the moon or Mars. And there were ground structures that you could now add to it to make this thing usable on the ground. So on Mars or on the moon. So that was actually what I did when I first left the Air Force. And that was a pretty amazing job. And then I went to the company I work for now.
Wow. Okay. And so Bigelow still exists?
So unfortunately, they do not exist. They are one of the companies that fell apart during COVID. So they don't exist anymore. But the technology they were using was actually NASA technology. And I don't know which company picked it up, but I heard that one of the other major aerospace companies actually did pick up the technology, and they're trying to continue with the research that we had done.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's what happens. Companies change, everything changes, life changes all the time. Okay. Right. So then you went to Denmark.
Right.
Tech, and that's where you are now. So tell us what you're doing there, and tell us your title there, and like how long you've been there and how the experience has been.
All right. So I work for the company Denmark that you just mentioned. I started working there in 2000. Oh, it's hard to remember years. 2016. So I've been there since then, and it's a really great company. It's small, relatively small company. We have about 100 employees, and we actually support pretty large contracts for the government, though. And so I still have the opportunity to use all the experience that I learned when I was in the Air Force, because my customer now is the equivalent of what I used to be. It's an Air Force officer. And so my job now is a deputy program manager, and I help manage the schedules manage the people that fix, we work on airplanes now. So I manage the maintenance team that fixes and launches and recovers the airplanes. And the airplanes are flown by the Air Force, and they have Air Force engineers, and we provide support to the engineers that they have. Their responsibility includes a lot more than just sitting down and designing something. So we, as the contractor that supports them, we help them with those designs, and we have multiple engineers that will do the different projects for them and then present it to them, and they get to either accept it or tell us to change it. And ultimately we're building it for them or designing it for them, so that way they can use it how they need to use it. And so right now the job I'm in is more a management role of managing the engineers and the maintenance technicians for these airplanes.
That sounds very interesting. You're super involved with the American Institute of Aeronautics, and then also I think I read something about a young professional liaison. Can you tell us about that and how that works?
So this is actually a really cool program. So the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, it's AIAA.org is their website. And they do have programs for high school kids. So if you're interested in aerospace, definitely check out their website. And it's the leading professional organization for the aerospace industry. So there's people part of this organization these are the thousands of people involved in this organization. And they have regular conferences, extended learning. So after you already graduated from college, you still want to continue to learn. And so they have opportunities to take courses that are more specific in what you are actually doing at work, what you're trying to do. They do conferences where you can go and present work you've done. You write papers about work you've done and you present it, or you just go and you watch other people present their information so that way you can learn from it. And they do have student programs. I don't know much about the high school program. I know there is something, but once you get to college, there's for sure the college version of it. And you get to do networking and interactions with the professional members, but they also have student opportunities they have student conferences. So you can write a student paper and you go to these conferences and you get to meet other students that have similar interests that you do. And you can share ideas or learn from each other. And it's a really big organization for obtaining additional technical information that you didn't learn in college, as well as networking with other people who have similar passions that you do.
That sounds amazing. And it sounds like a great organization for our super secret agent trainees that are interested in this stuff. Do they have like local chapters everywhere, or is it just like an online experience?
They have it all over the country. Not everywhere has a section that's super close, but so for example, I live in Las Vegas and I'm part of the Los Angeles section. So when I was in San Diego, there was a San Diego section. When I lived in Florida, working at the Space Center, we had the Space Coast section. So there's sections all over the country, and then different universities will have student chapters. They call them student branches. And my school's SDSU had one, and because we had an aerospace engineering department, and then there was also UC San Diego had their own. But we would meet together, the two universities, we would meet together at the local San Diego section activities. So during that, when I was in college, we would have dinners at the Air and Space Museum in San Diego and have opportunities to meet pretty famous people in the aerospace industry. So I don't know if any of you have heard of Burt Rutan, but I had an opportunity to meet him when I was in college. And he was one of the original, kind of like Elon Musk, but way earlier. So the technology was a little different and the risks weren't quite as accepted as they are now. So he didn't do quite as cool and stuff that is on TV like Elon Musk is doing, but people like that are the people you get to meet. And I've met several astronauts through that organization. And even the organization I'm in now that I'm speaking to you from is called AstraFemina. And one of the co-founders of it is a former astronaut who was also the executive director of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. And so you did ask the question about the board. So the young professional liaison, that was a pretty cool opportunity I had when I was about 30. And I got to be on a board of directors, or is it board of trustees for the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. And so that is, think of like vice presidents and CEOs of companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin and Boeing and Lockheed Martin. And so it was just an opportunity to see at an even higher level what kind of decisions are being made, and think about how there's like, when you get into an organization, there's so many different levels, and people, when the higher up you go, the more future looking they are. So at the lower level, it's more of what should we do today? What are we going to do tomorrow? You go higher up in the organizations, you start learning, okay, what are we going to do in 5 years, or 10 years, or 20 years? And so I got to meet all these people that are basically my parents' age. And, they were where I was 30 years before, and just getting to add them to my list of mentors as well. And just see how they conduct a business meeting, see how they communicate with each other, and how they can resolve conflicts or problems or create solutions, and just looking out for the organization as a whole and figuring out what is the best way to move forward as technology changes. So that was a pretty cool opportunity to be a part of.
Wow, thank you for sharing all of that. Actually, I was going to ask you about AstraFemina, so you mentioned it. That's awesome. And who were you talking about there?
So I was talking about Sandy Magnus. Have you met her?
No, I've talked to her on the phone. She's amazing.
She is amazing. So Sandy is, when she was in the space station, she held the record for, I think, the longest time a woman had been in space, I think was the record she held. It's pretty amazing. I think you all are going to have the opportunity to meet several AstraFemina members, and it's pretty cool to see the diversity of what we've all done in our careers, because we're all somewhat related to aerospace, but completely different in how we got to where we are and what we do. And there actually are quite a few that are astronauts, and it's really neat to meet them. One of the astronauts that's part of it was actually my very first boss when I joined the Air Force, and she was also an astronaut. And so it's just, I sit there, and to me, astronauts are kind of like movie stars. I get kind of shy when I see them, and they want to talk to me, and I start getting a little, embarrassed, and I'm not as good as you. And they're like, oh, don't say that. They are actually the biggest supporters I've had, because they know that everybody has the opportunities and to do different things. Everybody brings different skills to the table, and it's really important to see what everybody can bring to the table, because you can't do anything all by yourself. And so it's really cool to be part of this group of people that are so encouraging.
That's so true. I think it takes a tribe and a village, and I'm so happy that I connected with AstraFemina and that you all exist. I'm curious, how did you hear about it initially?
So that was actually through Sandy. I was at an AIAA conference, and I bumped into her in the hallway, and she said, "Hey, what are you doing?" Literally that casual. And here I am thinking, wow, you still remember me? You're an astronaut, and she says, "Oh, we started this group. You should be a part of it." And my response to her was, "Well, I'm not an astronaut." She says, "Oh, I don't care about that." She said, "You're doing amazing things, and we want you to be part of this group. And our goal is to provide mentorships to all the students that are watching right now, but also provide mentorship to each other. And it's a really, really good opportunity." There's just, I can't even put to words how many opportunities I've had, because I've been part of these two organizations, the AIAA and the AstraFemina.
That's phenomenal. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You also are a vice chair to the Florida Space Coast Station, right?
It was a Space Coast section, and that was also part of AIAA.
Okay, so that's connected. Yeah. It's all connected. And how did you do that?
Sorry, say again?
How did you do that?
So that one was, it was learning to do the next step in leadership. If you've started to get a trend here, I've been very involved in learning how to do leadership throughout my whole career, which is also being, manager. And so that was something I did when I was in my early 20s, and we got to lead the organization in the Space Coast of Florida, which is where NASA Florida is, and the Air Force Station is there. And so in that time when I was there, we coordinated the opportunities for all the members to come together. We'd have dinner meetings and networking opportunities for people just to have a way to wind down after work, come together, talk about their stories. And then we usually find a guest speaker who's done something pretty cool that we're all interested in hearing about. And we'd have dinner, they would talk, then we network with each other. And then, so that was what we did at the section level. And then through that same organizations where you have the opportunity to go to conferences and learn about more research or present your own research. So there's a lot of different elements to the AIAA.
Okay, awesome. Okay, we're going to switch to some questions from the students now. And one of them actually is a comment, but I'll read it and then there's questions. So you are a real life superhero. Thank you. Have you had someone who inspired you in your STEM journey?
I would say I've actually had a lot of mentors. And I think the most important ones that I've had are people who have taught me that no goal is too small. And it's okay to start out with a smaller goal, because if you are constantly only looking for the one big goal, then you might miss all the opportunities leading up to that. So challenge yourself, and when you successfully meet one of your goals, now it's time to start a new goal. And so I've had several mentors that have taught me that. And then I think there's just so many of them. I'm trying to remember if I could think of specific examples, but yeah, I would say the first one I had was that instructor I had in high school was the first one that taught me that. The other thing that I really learned from my mentors is that you got to try and keep in touch with them, because they're going to be able to remind you where you came from, and they're going to be able to tell you how far you've come, which I know that might sound silly at your age now, but when you get older, you get to a point where you get so used to doing certain things that you feel like you haven't exceeded anything in a while. And then you might talk to somebody who was your mentor 10 or 20 years ago, and then they say, hey, remember when you did this? And you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I did that, but you're right. And then you think about how far you've actually come, and they basically remind you that you're constantly improving. And that's always really motivating to continue to try and do new things and continue to find new challenges that inspire you to keep doing good things.
I think you're absolutely right. I think our super secret agents are learning as they go along, and as they grow up and, get into the industry and all the things they want to do. I think they'll remember these things, but I think all ages can definitely, take this advice. All right, next question. You are, like I said, another superhero. So what superpowers do you find you have that pushed you to where you are today?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say determination. If I do something that, like, kind of like the rocket project I did in college, instead of just giving up, I knew that there's people out there. NASA was doing it. We were college kids. We didn't have the funding like they do, or we didn't have the knowledge that they did, but we knew that it was possible. And so I think throughout my whole career, everything I've done, I just have that determination to do more. And I think that is probably my superpower is to continue to, I almost want to say, be stubborn, and just keep trying to pursue it. And if you fail, learn from your failures, because you're going to learn more from your failures than your successes, and continue to press forward.
That's so true. That's really good advice. On that note, why is it important for girls like our super secret agent trainees to learn about STEM?
So I think it's important because I think STEM is all around you, and everything that you do, it's somehow related. I just had this conversation with my daughter this morning. I don't remember what it was, but my answer to her was, no, that's science. Oh, she asked me if something was a miracle. I said, no, that wasn't a miracle. That's science. And so I think it's everywhere around you. And the more you learn it, the more you can appreciate things around you.
That's so true. Speaking of that, looking into the future is exciting. What do you imagine for girls in STEM down the road? And how can we make sure that everyone gets a chance to be part of the STEM adventure?
Okay, so that to me is like almost two very different questions, because I want to answer the second part of that question first. So going back to what I think I said this at the very beginning, you don't have to be tech savvy to get into STEM. So the example I like to give is actually, it's my brother-in-law. He loved aerospace engineering. He thought, he's a few years younger than me. So I was already in the Air Force when he graduated from high school. And my husband and I met when we were in college. So we weren't married yet, but we were dating for a long time before we got married. And his little brother basically looked up to me and was like, oh, I want to do what you're doing. I want to go launch rockets and all this stuff. And his whole family deterred him because they said, you're terrible at math. What are you going to do that for? Like, you're really bad at math. And his parents were like, okay, go do it, try. And he flunked out of engineering school. And it was so heartbreaking for him. And I felt so bad because I was trying to help encourage him and say, yeah, you can do it. And he just never was good enough at it. Was really the physics that got him. He struggled with the physics. And that set him back a little bit. So he ended up going back to community college and starting all over again. And he realized, okay, he still liked the concepts of, I think his actual interest was more like in numbers. So he went into like the accounting side and got his degree in finance, decided to be an accountant. And he was just kind of bored with his work until he finally found his current job. And now he works for an aerospace company. So he didn't get to do the engineering, but he works in the aerospace engineering company as their deputy to the CFO. So he's working as an accountant in aerospace. And so that to me is like the greatest example of somebody saying he loved airplanes. He loves going to air shows and seeing the technology and learning about what they're doing, but tech wasn't his thing. And so he found another way that he could still support the thing that he thinks is super cool and awesome, but with something that he's actually good at. And so I think you can do that with anything. I think AstraFemina is kind of like a great way for me to see how much variety we actually have in our careers, because we have people that are in business, we have doctors, we have teachers, we have all these different professions that are all supporting STEM. So that was the answer to that second question. So I think anybody can get into STEM. If you like STEM, it doesn't matter what you're actually good at. Find something that you know you can do that will make you happy. And then if it's part of STEM, then there's every single job out there related to STEM programs. So you can find them.
That's also true. And I appreciate you sharing those examples, because what your brother-in-law did, maybe it wasn't engineering, but still math is still STEM. And that's a huge part of what he does now. So
right.
Still very connected. Yeah.
And what was the first part of that question?
The first part was looking to the future is exciting, and what can we do to get more girls into STEM?
Okay, so I think we really need to do more programs like this. And this is one of AstraFemina's goals, is to bring more women in, because we are, even though like I'm around a lot of the women in STEM, so I start to get to the point where I forget that there aren't that many. But my graduating class in college was almost all guys. Here, I'll actually show you a picture of my graduating class. This is from when I graduated from college. If you look, that's my graduating class. There's only one person missing who was a girl, but there were two girls, and these are all the aerospace engineers that graduated. And so here we were, the only two girls amongst all of these guys. And even in my current job right now, I work with 40 people that I'm like, I told you I'm a program manager. I'm responsible for people. So I have 40 employees that work for me, and I have one woman. All the rest are men, and they act like high school boys, which is still funny because a lot of them are older than me. So it's always funny to think that. But within our company, we have, I think, out of the 100 employees, less than 10% of us are women.
Wow. Yeah, those are statistics that we hear every day. And that's why we're here to make sure that the future super secret agents know what jobs are available and what career paths they can find, and what access they have. So we really
and I think like for me, when I was growing up, because I didn't know what an engineer meant, I look back on it and I find it kind of shocking, because my grandfather was an engineer. And my best friends that I'm still friends with today, that I have since high school, their parents worked. One of their moms was she was a finance officer for the Air Force for the program that I ended up working for when I first graduated high school. And it was so funny because I had no idea she even worked it. And she's like, oh, that's my program. And I said, what are you talking about? You know, I had no idea. I didn't understand their jobs because people would just say words like engineering or finance officer or program manager. And as a high school kid, I had no idea what those words meant. Those were just grown-up words. And so it really helped me that I had the mentor when I said, well, I want to be space architect, because that sounds like something that makes sense to me. Those are kid words that I understood. And he says, well, that's what an aerospace engineer for NASA does. And I said, oh, really? What does that mean? You know, still even saying, well, what does aerospace mean? And it was just, I think that nowadays we're very lucky that we have opportunity to look things up. So I think that if there's something you like to do, Google it and say, like, you don't know the name of it, but say like, I want to build houses on Mars. What job do I need? And Google is going to help you find that stuff. And you're going to start to find the stuff about aerospace engineering. But ask any of those questions that you have. You know, something you sit there and say, oh, I don't know if this is a real job or not. Type in the words, what you want to do, and it's going to pop back all the different types of jobs that are related to what you want. And that'll help you find your true passion that way.
That's a really good advice. In fact, I was going to ask you like what you meant when you said space architect and where you got that from originally. So if you can share that with our secret agents, I think that would really be helpful.
So as a kid, I loved architecture. So my dad wanted me to be on computers as much as possible because he when he left the highway patrol, he actually went back into a STEM teaching job. And so he saw that there were all these girls, and this is, you know, you guys, or you girls, I will say it this way, you girls might notice this. Like there's a point when girls don't want to feel smarter than the boys because they don't want the boys to tease them. And so when I was growing up, my dad told me this. He says, I don't want you to ever think you're dumber than a boy. And I say, well, I'm smarter than my brothers, you know, because that's how kids are. And my dad's like, no, I'm serious. I don't want you to think you're ever dumber than a boy, because you're not. And you can do anything a boy can do if that's what you want to do. And so he always wanted to give us things to help us encourage us to learn. And so my dad, before he went in highway patrol, he actually worked in construction. So he was doing drafting a lot. And I was like, I like drafting. How, you know, can you teach me drafting? So I started doing drafting. I was like, well, what do you do this for? He says, well, I'm building houses. Like he used to work with my grandpa doing, he was in the highway patrol, but he would do, we would need something done at the house. So he would model it up. When I say model it up, he's actually drafting it with a pencil and an eraser on the drafting table right next to the TV. And we'd be sitting there watching TV, and Dad would sit there drawing on his drafting board. And so I was like, well, I want to do that. What do I have to do? He says, well, this is what an architect does. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And then we started getting really into learning about space at school. And so my dad got us a telescope. So we're looking at this telescope. And I was like, Dad, what do I have to do to do drafting for space? Like, I want to be an architect for space. And he says, well, you know, in your lifetime, people are going to go to Mars. So you could design houses for Mars. And so I was like, ooh, I could be a space architect. And that was where that term came from in my vocabulary. But that wasn't a job. I don't think even today they use that as a profession. I don't think you could go out there and be like, I want to be a space architect. What do I do? You can sit there and say, I want to work for SpaceX and figure out how they're going to do habitats on Mars. But I think their job titles are probably engineer, different types of engineer. You know, aerospace engineer, structures engineer, electrical engineer. None of those are going to say space architect.
Yeah.
So
no, I love it. That's why I want to come back to that. And thank you for sharing that. So what did you learn when you were 11 years old that you've kept with you today?
I think it was what I had just said, is that I don't have to be dumber than the boys. And I think I've proven that to myself for sure in the job I'm in right now, where I said, I am in charge of 40 people, 39 are men, and I'm their boss. So, you know, that was kind of a big thing, because that was around the age that my dad taught me that, and maybe that's the age when kids start to really think, oh, I don't want the boys to look at me differently if I'm smarter than them. Or, you know, sometimes girls like to pretend they're weaker, so that way boys think they're more attractive. And those are all things that my dad basically was like, no, don't do that, because we're smarter than that. And we don't have to put ourselves down for somebody to like us. And, you know, that's actually one of the things that I adore about my husband, is that he he appreciates my strength and my independence, and we feel like we are co-parents to and co heads of the household. Like when we do our taxes every year and you have to say who's the head of the household, we say, well, which one of us do we want to put? Because we feel that we are equals, and we don't like living in that stereotype of the man has to be the whole support of the house, because in reality it's a team effort and we do those things together.
I love that. And thank you for sharing that and getting personal in that, because we all are equal and we all want to be equal together in partnerships and business and relationships and your personal life, all the things. That's what makes us whole. And it's not just one thing. And I think it's all connected. So thank you again for sharing that. What advice would you give our aspiring secret agent trainees in the audience?
I would say set goals regularly. Find something that you want to achieve, and if it's a big goal, then set the small goals, but actually write them down or put them in your phone. My husband and I actually do this every year. When people write resolutions, we don't do resolutions, we do goals, and we go through and we say, this year, this is our goal. Or if it's a big goal, we'll say, okay, this is our goal for this year, but this is going to lead into this other goal that's for the next 5 years or 10 years. And set those goals so that way you can help yourself see how much you actually accomplish and continue to do more, because the more goals you set for yourself, you're going to be your biggest critic. You're going to be your biggest, like every obstacle you have is going to be your willpower to get through it. And so if you set these goals and you achieve them, you'll see what you can achieve. And you don't always achieve your goal, but that's when you have to set a smaller goal. Say, okay, well, I didn't make that one. Let me see what is something I could do that'll help me get to that goal. And then set that smaller goal and then keep working until you get to those big goals that you want to accomplish.
That's really good advice. Thank you. And on that note, I know you've done a lot of mentoring, I think for Discovery Future City Group, like another girl powered STEM program, like all the things. Like, how do you recommend, if our super secret agent trainees would like to be mentored by you or keep in touch with you, like how can we do that?
Well, I'm actually not really into social media or anything like that, so it's kind of hard. I would say the biggest way would just reach out through AstraFemina, because that is our goal, is to continue to mentor. And right now we have a speaker program is basically what we do. But I know that as we get bigger, we're trying new things. And I think if we have enough people interested, maybe, and enough membership and time and all of it. AstraFemina is a volunteer organization, but basically one of the things that I've talked with the founders about was, can we create a mentorship program that's more than just a one talk thing? And when I first asked that question, they said not yet, but that is definitely something that we want to consider. And so I would say for now, just keep in touch with AstraFemina.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes for sure, and I'll double check with Sandy on that. So thank you for sharing that. All right, we're going to do key takeaways in a little bit, but for now, let's do the 60-second quick answers. So favorite toy?
Wait, when, like right now or ever? Sorry, I'm not good at this.
Growing up as a child or now, either one, that's fine. Whichever one you want to share.
Oh my gosh. I would say when I was growing up, my favorite toy was my Game Boy.
Game Boy. And you mentioned earlier, so favorite video game?
What's that?
Favorite video game?
Any Mario Brothers games.
Okay, because I know you mentioned Tetris earlier, and I'm curious. I wanted to ask you if you watched a movie that was on Apple TV, the Tetris movie.
I haven't seen it yet. I
highly recommend it. You should definitely.
Oh, I know. Okay, current game. This is silly too. SimCity.
Okay, cool. I can see that because of the architecture and all the things. I can totally see that. And Super Mario Brothers, did you watch that movie?
No. I have a 5-year-old right now, so it's really hard to get time to really watch anything other than what she wants to watch. But
okay, you should watch that too. It's really good. And actually, you could watch it together. I think it's, it's animated, so, but the Tetris movie is like the origin story of how Tetris was made. And like,
oh, cool.
It's insane. Like, I'm still blown away, like, by that. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really fascinating. I have not seen that.
Yeah, it's on Apple TV. And there's another one also, I don't know if you were into Beanie Babies, but they also have a movie about that origin story as well on Apple TV. So that's really interesting as well.
Neat.
Yeah. Okay, so favorite superhero?
Incredimom. I don't know her real name, but it's from The Incredibles. The mom.
Yes. Okay.
Elastigirl, that's what it is.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Favorite sci-fi? Like either Star Wars or Star Trek or any others potentially?
I'm not really into any of those long term movies, but one of my favorite sci-fi movies is the movie Gattaca.
Mm. Okay. I think that's an older one, right?
That's an older one. That's like Ethan Hawke and Jude Law. I think that may have been like early 90s or early 2000s.
Yeah, I think our secret agents will have to Google
So
that and watch that. But
I
yeah,
do love sci-fi movies, but I haven't really gotten into any of the, like you said, Star Trek or Star Wars. I'm not really into any of those series, but I do like the sci-fi movies, like the space movies or like Inception. I think that's more relatively
yeah,
new movie. I think that's almost 10 years old now, but
yeah, that was a really good one too. On that note, any shows or animated series that you watched as a kid or now as well?
so growing up, I actually grew up on Friends. I started watching Friends when I was 10 years old. That was in 1994. And I watched that, never missed a single episode. I had a VCR so I could record it if I wasn't home. And that was before TiVo and before streaming. And I watched every episode. And then nowadays, I usually watch things on Netflix, and I like the fantasy genre. So like the series Once Upon a Time, I've rewatched that series like 3 or 4 times. And I love the adult take on the Disney fairy tales.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, thank you for sharing that. So we're going to do key takeaways now, and if we missed anything, please feel free to add. All right, so you learn more from your mistakes than your successes. Follow your fears. Everyone brings something to the table. Work as a team. No goal is too small. Challenge yourself and create goals for yourself regularly. Keep in touch with your mentors. Learn from your failures. Be determined to succeed. STEM is all around us. You don't have to be dumber, in quotation marks, than the boys.
Yeah. Sorry, maybe that's not the correct word to use, but
It's okay.
but yeah, those are absolutely my key takeaways.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sofia, for sharing your journey with us. And our super secret agent trainees have so much to learn from you, and I'm sure they're excited to hear about what you do in the future. So they'll probably find you somehow. Thank you again for your time. And that's all we have today for WhizGirls Academy. We'll be back tomorrow with more. So thank you again. See you next time.